We're going into the last part of Chapter 3 on classification or taxonomy. Cartoon on the far side. It's a bunch of bugs at a bug cocktail party. And the caption, if you can't read it, says, "Think about it, Ed. The class Insecta contains 26 orders, almost 1,000 families, and over 750,000 described species. But I can't shake the feeling we're all just a bunch of bugs." It turns out there's lots and lots and lots of different species of insects. But there's also a lot of species of named species of insects. People have been catching and preserving and looking really, really closely at insects as a hobby for a couple hundred years. So there's a tremendous number of insect species on the books. They may or may not be the biggest group of animals, but on paper, literally on paper, they're the biggest group of animals by all this description. My background is roundworms. For every species of insect, there's at least one species of roundworm living in it. So, and there's roundworms living in everything else too. So there's more species of them, but nobody ever names those, or very few people name them, because no one cares. Anyway, we talked about the kingdom systems in the last go-round. And I mentioned that the next thing we're going to do is your basic introductory six-kingdom system. We're going to kind of ignore the domains, but we're going to do the six kingdoms. When I first started teaching, there were 5 kingdoms, is that those domains formed a split off of one of the kingdoms to 2. It gets confusing. It's biology. It's always confusing. And you'll notice even this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So we've got kingdoms and domains. The domains are supposed to be bigger, but here we got 2 domains that seem to contain one kingdom, which obviously does not make a heck of a lot of sense. But this is the way that it works. So we're going to take these 2 domains and we're going to fold this one up here. And that's going to be this kingdom, that's going to be this kingdom, and then we got 4 more. One of the first things I need to deal with is these are a totally different type of cell than all of these. These are what are called prokaryotes. These are what are called eukaryotes. Prokaryotic cells, commonly called bacteria, are little compared to eukaryotic cells. This is just a part of a eukaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cells don't have chambers in them that are separate from the membrane. Sometimes the membranes fold in, but they don't form bubbles, they don't have a nucleus, they don't have a whole bunch of things inside them that eukaryotic cells, our type of cells, have. So we've got 2 kingdoms that are these guys, and 4 kingdoms that are these guys. Now, I do apologize. It turns out that I tried this, I did this video once before, and I got a little bit of ways into the kingdoms, and I had forgotten to silence my phone, and the phone rang, and rather than just break in the middle and come back to it, I decided to start over. But I'm cheap. I buy this overhead clear material, so I'm just going to put up what I'd already had written down and walk you through what we have so far. So our 6-kingdom system. We've got the 2 prokaryotes, the Monera and the Archaea. And I always tell you when I lie to you, but there are times when I have to lie to you for reasons. And in this case, there are distinct differences between these 2 different types of bacteria, but I don't fully, completely understand them. They're very biochemical. I know it has to do with the way that they make their cell walls. I know it has to do with the way that they process their DNA, but I don't even know the details of it. So we're going to fudge this a little. I'm going to give you differences, because when I ask you a question about this, I like you to list the kingdoms and then to give me features that make them distinct from all the other kingdoms. And here, we're gonna fudge a little bit. So for the Monera, we're gonna say that they're way more common out and about in the world, much more likely to be found in a normal environment, whereas Archaea are rarer, and if you're gonna find them, you're most likely gonna find them in an extreme environment. Now, what's an extreme environment? Extreme environments are where you're kind of surprised anything lives. Hydrothermal vents in the bottom of the ocean, hot springs, incredibly salty lakes, 8 miles down in the bedrock, is that there's all sorts of strange, fringy ecosystems in the world that are very difficult for anything to live in. If you're gonna find something there, it is way more likely to be Archaea bacteria. And they're called this because they're often considered to be representative of the oldest living things, like kind of the first living things, back when the Earth was kind of extreme everywhere. But just within the last couple of months, I've been reading articles that are saying these guys are not as separate as they have been reputed to be, looking at DNA comparisons. And so the whole domain thing may kind of fall apart. These things may actually be fairly closely related to us, way more than these guys are. But that's for much more advanced stuff. So everything from here down are eukaryotes, and there's gonna be 4 kingdoms of eukaryotes. The first one's up here, the protists, the protista. They're the big cells with the chambers in them, but most of the protista phylum are single-celled, unicellular species. So they're separate cells living in the world. Malaria is in this group. The thing that causes beaver fever is in this group. Amoebas, a lot of people know what an amoeba is. Amoebas are in this group. Now, a number of years ago, since I've been teaching, there was some sort of revolution in the plant people. And they decided that there's algae that lives in the ocean that are almost nothing more complicated than sheets of photosynthetic cells. And they decided that the plant kingdom wasn't going to include them anymore. They were going to bump them off into the protist kingdom. I don't know that the protist people had anything to say about it. So it used to be, these were just single-celled eukaryotes. But now we also have to fold in the very simple multi-celled algae. But they're barely, I mean, there's more than one cell, but they're all very, very, very similar cells. There's not a lot of structure or anything to them. So that's the protist kingdom. The next eukaryote kingdom are the plants. Nice in Latin, Plantae or Plantae. And these are multi-celled. Everything from here on will be. And they do photosynthesis. They're first level transformers. They take light and use it to make bond energy in glucose, in fuel molecules. Now, this alone isn't enough to distinguish the plants, because there are photosynthesizers in here, and there are Archaea photosynthesizers, and there are Monera photosynthesizers. But these guys, except for these weird algae, these guys are pretty much the only multi-celled. I took the phone off the hook. How could it possibly be ringing? Well, hopefully it's not too loud on this. This is almost exactly where it happened the last time, but the phone's off the hook. I don't know how it could possibly be ringing. Anyway, very distracting though. Those two things together pretty much set the plants apart. We have 2 more kingdoms to do. And they are more closely related than you would think. Chemically, DNA-wise, is that these guys have a common ancestor much closer to them than they have to the plants or the protists or any of this other stuff. But these are both multi-celled groups. The fungi have some single-celled members. Yeast is a single-cell fungus, but typically they're a multi-celled group. And the typical things you think I'm going to tell you to make them different isn't that trustworthy. Animals move, right? No, a lot of animals don't move. So you can't, I'm gonna have movement up here, but it's not that trustworthy. It's weird, there is a very trustworthy distinction between these groups. It's how they get their food. I guess you're gonna be hearing this in the background. So I've got usually move up there. Animals have internal chambers that are digestive chambers. So they take food in, they break it down, they absorb it across those surfaces. Funguses, I'm gonna put ... so I don't have to write digest and absorb again. Across the outer surface. And your typical fungus, not all of them, but your typical fungus consists of long strings of cells distributed through materials that they can break down and absorb nutrients from. So again, it's the thing that makes them really seem different is not completely trustworthy. You'll find funguses this doesn't apply to. You'll find animals that don't necessarily move. Sorry, I'm trying to get through this to find out what the heck is going on. This is what I mean. You tend to think of mushrooms being a fungus, and a mushroom is actually a special part of a fungus that it uses to release spores to the environment. If you pluck a mushroom up, it seems like it just breaks off the soil and there's nothing there. That's because what connects from underneath are these separate fibers that just break. And they're single cell strands, so you wouldn't see them without a good magnification system. And you know, a mushroom, as I said, just part of a fungus, is that the whole fungus is distributed, some of them for multi-square miles under the ground. Okay, we've got one more section that's gonna be really short, but obviously someone is trying like crazy to get a hold of me, so I'm gonna put that on the next video.